April
Charge!
1241. The land that would one day be Poland is raw with smoke. Farm fences cinder and collapse. People vanish from roads.
For the glory
Rumors
of the
travel faster
Empire!
than riders, devils on shaggy ponies, arrows that hiss like hornets, an army that appears in dust and then nothing. And 3 days later you find only bones. We open with a line on a map that is not a line at all, but a fan. From the east, across the cold rivers and low ridges of Silesia, the Mongol screen unspools like a hunting dog's leash. The names attached to it, Baidar, Kadan, mean less to Europe than the word that follows them, grandson and son of Khans. They are not raiders, they are managers of distance. To understand what is about to happen at Legnica, you need to put your finger on 3 pressure points: speed, silence, and story. Speed you already know. The Mongol horse archer moves farther in a day than most European messengers. Silence isn't literal, there are drums at night to keep you awake, but informational. You never receive a complete picture of the enemy, only slivers, always a little late. And story is the most dangerous of the 3 because it takes the first 2 and feeds them into your expectations about glory. Duke Henry II the Pious has a good story. A coalition is forming around him. Polish levies, Silesian knights, contingents of Moravian foot, and, most exciting for monks chronicling this, detachments of the Teutonic and Templar orders. Banners look like answers. Plate and mail look like certainty. Henry's scouts report villages stripped, patrols shot up by invisible archers, enemy outriders who refuse to stand and fight. That last bit is crucial. It reads as weakness to a European commander trained on the tournament field. If a man will not stand, you can make him. If he runs, you can ride him down. On the other side of this fog, Baidar and Kadan are building a different story. Their riders are not refusing battle, they are shaping it. The first day is harassment. Long arcs at bow range, probing shots, then a peel-off. The second day is pressure. More arrows, a sudden stab by heavier cavalry against a flank, then a refusal, gone into the folds of land, still close enough to sting, never close enough to seize. The third day is invitation. A visible weakness, a pocket of horse archers that stays too long in view, a banner that lingers a beat too late on a ridge line. A door left ajar. Feigned retreat is often misdescribed as running away until the enemy tires. It's not a chase scene. It's a choreography of distances. The Mongols tune the length of every gap, between skirmishers and supports, between decoys and the real hammer, like bowstrings. They're counting your horse lungs. They're measuring the weight of mail, the slope of a hill, the time it takes for a knight to signal a trumpet and wheel a squadron. Most of all, they are measuring your hunger. Henry does not start hungry. He starts careful, keeping his line, refusing the first day's temptations. He sets his banners on good ground and makes the horse archers pay for every step with crossbow bolts. The bolts don't catch many. Reloading a windlass while the target is already a field away is an act of faith, but they buy rhythm. He watches the Teutonic and Templar contingents settle into the line like iron stakes. Morale climbs. Rumor that treacherous courier begins to reverse direction. Perhaps the devils bleed after all. Night is a weapon. Imagine a sleepless camp, torches banking low, horses cropping tight circles in the trampled grass. Far off, the beat of drums, irregular, more felt than heard, adds a splinter to every thought. Henry's lords argue for and against a dawn advance. We must break this harassment and force them to stand. We must not be drawn. The chroniclers later write this as a debate between courage and caution. It was really a debate between 2 clocks. Henry's supplies and nerves are both running down. The enemy's patience is not. At first light, the Mongol screen is already in motion, dust stacked in layers over the horizon. They are close, then far, then close again along a parallel lane you didn't know existed. They fire in curves, not straight lines. Arrows arc over your leading elements and drop into the rear, forcing your men to turn, forcing sergeants to reshuffle ranks, forcing captains to ride and dress the line again and again. None of this kills an army. All of it breaks a schedule. The terrain does the rest. Legnika's approaches are not grand plains, they're pockets. Low streams, uneven fields, orchard walls. If you fight here, your formation becomes a series of beads along a string. The Mongols fetch the string. At midday, a courier from the north rides in half dead and full of bad news about Hungarian fields and rivers, a storm with hooves. He speaks names Henry does not command and distances Henry cannot fix. If there is a lever here, he cannot see where to jam it. He chooses the decision in front of him. Counter the harassment. Drive the skirmishers off. Bring order back to the ground. He detaches a strong mounted body, enough to swat gnats without weakening the main column, and pushes them forward under a banner that promises everyone watching. Now we will make them stand. They stand just long enough. The first contact is clean. The decoy group lets the lances come into the last seconds, then peels like bark, flowing back through a thinning in the fog you would swear was nothing a heartbeat ago. The European horses labor. Weight is a physics lesson, not a metaphor. The second contact is dirtier. The archers stop a little longer. A heavier Mongol unit shows left for a breath, then disappears right, inviting a turn, inviting a wedge to break cohesion and sprint. The third contact is the hook. The pursuing knights, tired, angry, elated at the nearness of a real kill, break the last rule their instructors try to grind into them. Keep your interval. They don't, because this feels like the moment. The decoys are right there. You can see their faces. Baidar and Kadan are not waiting behind one ridge with one cavalry punch. That's the story Europe expects and trains to survive. What's waiting is a set of layers. Horse archers widening to your flanks like curtains drawn back. A heavier body angled onto your line of advance, and a reserve you don't see yet because they're masked by smoke that looks like mist until it moves against the wind. It's not one trap. It's a room with 3 doors that all lock behind you. The tactical vocabulary for this is simple. Feigned retreat, envelopment, isolation. The experiential vocabulary is uglier. Horses begin to scream because arrows find the gaps they always find. The chest, the eyes, the inside of a foreleg. Men try to dress ranks and cannot because ranks are no longer a thing you dress. They're a thing you remember. Officers signal and discover their signals go nowhere in the dust. Courage, which everyone brought from home, is suddenly a heavy pack instead of a tool. Sometime in this blur, Henry makes the only call left to men whose front is dissolving. Form on something that does not dissolve. The Templars and Teutonic brothers do what they were built to do. Lock, brace, and become an anvil. The rest of the first day is an education in what an anvil feels like when the hammer never stops moving. The Mongols do not charge the square to break it. They bite it. They circle and sting. They fall back and return. They keep the horses of the square prancing and sweating until the men are fighting their mounts as much as the enemy. Every minute is a little theft of breath. Then night again. Drums again. The horses do not sleep. Neither does the fear that maybe none of this is a battle at all. Maybe it's a sorting. By the second dawn, everyone believes a different story. Henry believes he's one firm push from clearing the road to Legnica and establishing a position that will make the enemy stop playing. Baidar believes Henry is exactly one more invitation away from taking the last steps into the room. Both can be right for another hour. There's a detail the sources cannot agree on. How many men Henry has at first light of the third day? How many banners are still stitched to him instead of to the smoke behind? But the detail that matters is simpler. The pursuit detachment is now its own army, psychologically if not on the roster. They've been promised a back to hit. They will not stop until they feel it give, and the back never gives. It vanishes. That is the knife twist of the feigned retreat. You never get the joy of a broken enemy running. You get the certainty that your enemy can always still run, which means you can always still catch him, which means you run yourself. The arcs close. We'll walk those arcs in the next block, where the screen becomes a wall, where the wall becomes a ring, and where Henry's choices narrow until they become one. Dawn, day 3. Breath smokes from horses like torn silk. The grass is frosted, the mud underneath is not. Henry II's column wakes into motion with the stiffness of men who slept in armor and never really slept. Drums are careful, voices low. Far off on a ridge that looks like yesterday's ridge and the day before's, a scatter of riders toys with the horizon. Too small to threaten, too deliberate to ignore. If Block 1 was about hunger, Block 2 is about narrowing corridors. How a battlefield that looks open slowly edits your options until you are moving inside someone else's paragraph. Start with the screen. Mongol warfare uses two kinds, a visual screen and a distance screen. The visual screen is the obvious one. Horse archers spread thin, dust lit like gauze, flags that appear at the lip of a fold then slip away. You think you are looking at an army. You are looking at a veil. The distance screen is meaner. They don't let you close the distance you choose. They let you close the distance they choose. Every time you push, they give ground equal to your best sprint minus the cost you paid to achieve it. You feel momentum. They are measuring attrition. Henry's answer is textbook European. Fix with infantry, decide with cavalry. He sets a blocky center, banners of Silesia and Lesser Poland hammered into line, Moravian foot braced behind wagon tongues, the Templar and Teutonic contingents forming the hard hinge. From this hinge he releases a mounted force to bite the skirmishers ahead and swat them from the road. It feels tidy. It looks tidy on a map. But maps are liars when the other side designed the ground. Because the ground here is not plains, it's a string of shallow bowls. Streams cut seams that don't look like obstacles until you have to cross them. Orchard walls don't look like fortifications until your intervals compress into single files and then need to be redressed under arrow fire. Every 100 paces the line kinks and must be ironed. Every time you stop to iron, the screen drifts just out of range. Your men call it cowardice. Your officers call it infuriating. And the men on scraggy ponies silently call it Plan A. Now watch the screen become a wall, not a fortress wall. No stakes and mantlets, something subtler. A moving front that refuses contact while preventing you from ever swinging wide. When Henry tries to throw weight left, a little more dust blooms on that flank. When he shifts right, the riders on that side thicken. Mongol signals are not banners alone. They are horn codes, arm flags, and most unnerving pre-briefed timing. Their riders are clockwork in leather. They don't improvise where it counts. The improvisation happened 4 days ago when the plan was carved. Here's a detail that feels like a ghost story and reads like good engineering: smoke. Chinese-made smoke pots. Ceramic, pitch-sealed. Do not explode. They exhale. Light them on a favorable wind and you make fog where there was none. Deepen mist where there was some. Cut your opponent's line of sight at precisely the moment his captain is trying to read hand signals. European chroniclers call it sorcery. Mongol quartermasters call it inventory. Henry's captains are not fools. They know when they are losing sight lines. They shorten them. Ranks pull closer, messaging moves from flags to throats to drums and therefore becomes slower. Slower messaging in a formation that must constantly redress is like a faulty ankle in a runner. The run can continue, but every stride costs. Knights, frustrated by the loping, luring enemy, argue for a charge that will pin something. Henry does something disciplined and difficult. He refuses the big sprint twice. He clips the leash, keeps the mass. For another hour, he preserves the shape of an army. The Mongols reward him with a mistake, not a real one, an edible one. A troop of horse archers stays too long on a low rise, firing into the edges of the Templar block. They are at that hateful in-between range where arrows still hurt, but a gallop could catch them. The Templar master asks to go. Henry hesitates. The Teutonic commander adds weight to the request. Let us clear them so the foot can breathe. Henry nods. He detaches not a trickle but a meaningful bite. Knights with supporting sergeants, a disciplined thrust with standards that will be visible to his whole front. This is not a rout into the fog. This is a controlled needle. The needle strikes and enters cloth that yields. The archers peel back in exemplary disorder. Some ride too fast, tempting pursuit. Some ride too slow, tempting contempt. One drops his quiver and pauses to snatch it in a way that makes you want to put a spear through his spine. The Teutonic wedge accelerates despite orders to hold the pace. The Templar wing, not to be outdone, narrows intervals to keep touch. A secondary Polish banner comes along because once motion is visible, stillness feels like failure. The main body opens its fingers to let the spear fly. 2 minutes later, the wall becomes a corridor. The screens that teased are now two pale ribs of riders curving inward as they fall back. The wedge of knights rushes into the empty space between these ribs, and the ribs seem to lean together gently, like hedges in a lane. No one says envelopment. Everyone feels narrower sky. The corridor steepens. Arrows rake from both ribs, not dense enough to stop heavy horses outright, constant enough to make men lift shields and twist in saddles. Twisting breaks pace. Broken pace breaks order. Trumpets call to widen intervals. There is no room. Trumpets call to wheel left. No space to swing. Trumpets call to pull back. That last call is the first honest panic. Pulling back means turning in a corridor you barely fit through going forward. Horses hate it. Men hesitate. The ribs tilt another degree, now the ring. The Mongol light riders on the ribs are not alone. Behind them are layers, and behind those layers is weight. The weight does not crash like a knightly charge. It arrives like the end of a lever, short, sharp, decisive. Heavier Mongol cavalry, not plate-armored tanks, but men on rested horses with lances they only use when bodies are already tangled, hits the mouth of the corridor and closes it. This is not a charge that smashes. This is a door that snicks. The wedge is now a bead separated from its string. Henry sees it. His best, truest instinct is immediate. Open the door. He signals for the reserve to punch the hinge, not the bead. He doesn't fling more men into the corridor. He tries to break the ribs that created it. If he can blunt a rib even for a minute, the bead can spill back through the gap and be a hand again instead of a fist stuck in a jar. The reserve moves and strikes smoke and noise. The ribs are now noisy where quiet ruled before. Drums, horns, shouted syllables that aren't commands so much as syncopation. Smoke jars the eye. A volley of arrows snaps from an angle that suggests nobody should be there. A ripple of ponies moves across ground that did not look like a path 5 minutes ago. The reserve feels the physics. We are not hitting an edge. We are hitting an edge that slides. Inside the bead, the Teutonic and Templar brothers tighten and do what they were forged to do: become geometry. Square isn't a shape, it's a promise. No flanks, all faces front. It holds against lances, against bravado, against stories of invincibility. It does not hold against mathematics. The Mongols don't break it, they price it. Horses on the perimeter burn through breath. Mounts inside stamp and fight reins. Men cook under mail and wool. Arrows search for the armpit, the cheek, the groin. The square can't advance. It can only exist. Existence here is a timer. Henry tries again. He fakes wide on one rib. Dust drums a half battery shoving forward to threaten, but the rib flexes without breaking. The opposite rib thickens and a new line of riders appears, not where there should be land, but where a thin stream was supposed to make trouble for them. It doesn't. Their ponies eat streams. Your chargers do not. In 3 heartbeats, the possible path to the bead becomes a calculus of fear. Cross at the shallow and take the arrows, or cross at the deep and drown under the weight you paid good silver to wear. He does the only sane thing. He calls the pursuit back into himself and compacts the main body, shortening the line to grow the fist. This is exactly the right move against a screen and a wall. Against a ring, it is exactly on time, 1 hour ago, because the ring is not static. It breathes. When your line nears a gap, the ring bulges and the gap slides. When your cavalry threatens, the light riders thin and the heavies tilt their lances, not to meet you in an equal smash, but to bump you offline, to make your best hit land on smoke. You cannot wrestle wind, but wind can push a man who insists on keeping his feet just so. There's a moment chroniclers love, Henry's banner dipping as he's hit at the arm joint, then rising again as his guard knits around him, and it deserves the ink. Leadership is oxygen. Men seeing the banner hold breathe deeper. For a quarter hour the compression slows. The square hisses but does not burn. The corridor mouth flickers open, then shut, then open again. If a miracle lives anywhere near Legnica, it lives in that quarter hour. Then the story turns one last time, and it turns not on courage but on the part of war Europe had not yet learned to worship: logistics. The Mongols have arrows, many arrows. Each rider carries dozens, each remount carries more. Their strings are dry because they were unstrung in the night. Their horses are fresh because the horse under a man right now is not the horse that carried him in the morning. Their heavy lances are used like punctuation, rarely when a point must be made. Henry's men have valor, shaped timber, and iron. They do not have time. The longer the ring breathes, the more air it takes from his army. You could script a heroic breakout here. A break happens, but it's not a door thrown down by a single ride. It's a tear. A piece of the ring thins enough that Henry can pull back the stump of his wedge, enough that he can form again on a new line, shorter, uglier, closer to Legnica, but not at Legnica. It feels like salvation and reads like reprieve. The square that bought it no longer exists as a square. It exists as a memory of a stand and a knot of bodies whose right ears, if you believe the sack tallies, are already counted. By the last light, the ring is not a ring anymore because it doesn't have to be. What remains of the coalition moves as a bruise, tender, tight, reactive. The Mongols stop spending arrows and start spending space. They drift just far enough to remain the horizon. They don't need to kill everything. They need Europe to learn the wrong lesson, that the enemy cannot be made to stand. The right lesson is meaner, that standing or running are not the two choices. The real choice is whether you can see the room you are being walked into before the door shuts. Next, we'll step into the room's blueprint, unit by unit, where squares held, where they were priced, and how, in parallel, a different door slammed shut on another field the same day. And we'll plant our what-if at the exact hinge, the order Henry could have given that changes not glory but geometry. Morning of the 3rd day. The ground is white with frost, the mud beneath still soft. Henry II the Pious forms his line with what remains of his coalition. Polish and Silesian knights in the center, Moravian infantry behind wagon tongues, the Teutonic knights on one wing, the Templars on the other. Drums speak softly, horses breathe steam. On the far ridge, like yesterday's ridge and the day before's, a thin sprinkle of riders appears, as if to remind everyone that the enemy is always just out of reach. What looked like a screen of horse archers now becomes a wall, and the wall, slowly and quietly, becomes a ring. At first it feels like more of the same. Riders drift in, loose a cloud of arrows, then drift away, always just beyond the last sure gallop of a heavy warhorse. But the pattern tightens. When Henry pushes left, more dust rises on the left. When he leans right, the riders thicken on that side. The enemy is not refusing battle, he is rewriting the ground under Henry's feet, bending the approach into shallow bowls and narrow lanes where intervals shrink and must be redressed again and again. Every halt to dress the ranks steals a breath. Every stolen breath is a debt the coalition will pay later. Smoke appears where there should be none, not campfire smoke. A low, heavy fog rolls out of earthen pots, Chinese smoke devices the Mongols learned to use in the East, lit at the moment when Henry's captains most need their eyes. The smoke does not kill. It makes messages slower. Flags vanish. Horn calls blur. Orders must move by voice and drum, which means orders move late. Henry knows the cure for being teased at a distance. Fix with foot soldiers, decide with a hard-mounted thrust. He keeps his course steady and sends out a strong, disciplined wedge to drive the horse archers off a low rise and clear the road. Banners dip and rise. The men feel the change. Now we stop being hunted. The Mongols agree, on their terms. The decoy band sits a heartbeat too long, shoots a little too much, and only then gives way. It is exactly the taste a tired rider needs to spur harder. The wedge presses. Intervals narrow. A supporting banner slides into keep touch, because standing still while comrades move feels like failure. The main body opens a gap to let the spear fly. The gap becomes a corridor. The screen on either side of the wedge thickens into two pale ribs of riders curving inward as they retreat. Arrows rake from both ribs, not dense enough to stop the charge, constant enough to make men lift shields and twist in their saddles. Twisting breaks pace. Broken pace breaks order. Trumpets call to widen intervals. There is no room. Trumpets call to wheel left. There is no space to swing. Trumpets call to pull back. That call is honest and late. Turning heavy horses inside a narrow lane is harder than pushing forward. The door closes. A fresh body of Mongol heavy cavalry, men on rested mounts with lances used like punctuation, not as a constant, slides across the mouth of the corridor. No spectacular crash, just a clean lock. The wedge is now a bead slid off the string. Henry reads it at once. He does not fling more men into the trap. He orders the reserve to break the ribs, not to pour into the corridor. If the ribs thin, even for a minute, the bead can spill back into the palm. It is the right idea, and it arrives into smoke and timing. Horns answer horns. The ribs flex without breaking. A new line of riders appears across a stream that looked like a boundary 5 minutes ago. Their ponies eat the stream. Heavy chargers do not. The path to the bead becomes a choice between taking arrows at the shallow crossing or drowning under iron at the deep. Inside the bead, the brothers of the orders, Templars and Teutonic Knights, turn into geometry. They form a square. A square is more than a shape. It is a promise. No flank, every face a front. It stops what it is meant to stop, direct shock. It does not stop what the Mongols bring, time. The square is priced, not broken. Arrows search for armpits, cheeks, the inside of thighs. Horses on the perimeter burn through breath. Horses inside stamp and fight the bit. The men cannot advance. They can only persist. Henry fakes wide with the reserve drums and dust to suggest a turn. The ring breathes and slides. Where he leans, it thins. Where he thins, it thickens. He tries on the opposite side. The ring answers again. This is not a wall to crack. It is a net that moves. Chroniclers freeze a brave instant. Henry's banner dips as a shaft finds the joint in his armor, then rises again as his guard knits around him. Banners are oxygen. Men see the standard hold and breathe again. For a quarter hour, the press slows. At the corridor mouth there is a flicker. Open, shut, open again. If there is a near miracle at Legnica, it lives here in a bubble of time bought by a square that refuses to dissolve. Logistics finish what arrows began. The Mongols have depth, spare quivers on remounts, bowstrings kept dry at night, horses rotated so the animal under a rider now is not the one that carried him at dawn. Their heavy lances are used only when bodies are already tangled. Henry's coalition has courage and iron. It does not have spare time or spare wind. The longer the ring breathes, the less air the army has left. The break that comes is not a triumph. It is a tear. On one rib, the riders thin just enough for just long enough that the remnant of the wedge can be pulled back into the main body. The square that bought that tear is a memory now. Men down, banners saved, lines shortened. The army reforming behind Henry is smaller, tighter, angry, and tired. It is closer to Legnica, but not at Legnica. The Mongols stop wasting arrows. They start spending distance. They drift far enough to remain the horizon, close enough to punish any move that looks like a straight line. They do not need to kill everything. They need to teach the wrong lesson, that the enemy cannot be made to stand. The right lesson is harsher. Standing and running are not the only choices. The real choice is whether you see the room you are being led into before the door shuts. By afternoon, the field is a chain of small disasters. A Polish banner turns to answer a shout that is not a command but the echo of fear. In that turn, files open and arrows slip through the ribs like rain through thatch. A Moravian block tries to follow a flag into better ground and finds the ground worse. A soft seam where hooves sink and men crowd. A Teutonic remnant, shield to shield, steps back on a slow count only to discover the count belongs to someone else. Every small failure has the same shape, a plan that assumes the enemy will meet you where you expect to be met. Henry is taken in the chaos. Some sources say an arrow under the arm where plates meet. Others say a fall from the saddle after the blow. In either case, his guard fights over him, and the banner dips for the last time. After the battle, his body is recognized not by his face but by a detail on his foot, an extra toe, when his mother searches the field. The Mongols count the dead by cutting right ears. Chroniclers write of 9 sacks filled. Numbers never agree in medieval texts. What agrees is the silence that follows. By sunset, the ring no longer needs to breathe. The coalition moves like a bruise, tight, tender, reactive. Night will come again with drums. The next day will not be a battle, it will be sorting. Prisoners, spoils, messages sent by fear. Europe will call the Mongols devils on horseback and miss the real horror. Not fury, but patience. In the next block, we will rewind the last 3 days and pin down the exact joints. How the feigned retreat was built from timing and terrain, when the corridor became a trap, who held, who bought time, and where a different order from Henry, earlier by a single hour, might have changed the shape of the day. We will also plant the what if that matters, not what if they were braver, but what if the pursuit had a leash, and who was allowed to cut it? By noon the 3rd day, the field near Legnica looked ordinary from a hill. Thin smoke, broken hedges, men moving in knots. Up close it was something else entirely. The hunt the Mongols had prepared, 3 days of teasing retreats and measured stings, was ready for its last move. Europe still thought in straight lines. Find the enemy. Push forward, force him to stand. The Mongols thought in circles. Start with the shape of Henry's army after the morning shocks. The coalition was still there, Polish and Silesian knights, Moravian infantry, the brothers of the Teutonic Order and the Templars, but it was shorter and tighter. The best mounted men who had chased the decoys had come back fewer, tired and scattered. The infantry blocks had drifted out of perfect alignment while they dressed ranks under arrow fire and smoke. Most banners still flew. Most hearts still held. But the army no longer moved as one line. It moved as several pieces trying to become a line again. The Mongols pressed without pressing. Their light cavalry, the horse archers with short, powerful bows, kept a steady ring just outside a sure charge. They were close enough to hurt, far enough to vanish. When a European unit stepped forward, the ring widened. When it hesitated, the ring narrowed. It was not a fixed fence. It was a breathing circle with a single rule. We decide distances, not you. Here is where the famous feigned retreat finished its work. On the first day, it had drawn out a pursuit and then bled it. On the second day, it had trained Henry's commanders to expect an enemy that always yielded just enough. On the third, in the hour after noon, it offered one last promise. A gap on the ring's eastern side that looked like escape. Through the smoke, men saw it. It was real, until it wasn't. Henry tried what any commander would try. He pulled his best remaining cavalry into a point, put infantry blocks on either side to keep the point from being cut off, and aimed at the gap. If the point broke through, the rest could follow. If the point failed, the infantry anchors might still hold. The point moved. Arrows thickened. The ring flexed and gave ground in front, while on both sides riders flowed inward like water. The point kept going. For a few breaths, the field made sense. Go forward. Hold tight. Open the door. Then, with the speed of a door on a spring, a new mass appeared where there had been empty air. Fresh Mongol cavalry, not heavy like European knights in full plate, but rested fast and ready to strike once. They did not crash into the point head-on. They slid across it. Lances and bodies clipped the front ranks just enough to slow them, just enough to throw the timing off. In that small hesitation, arrows found eyes and armpits. Horses tried to choose between fear and duty. Men tried to choose between pride and survival. The choice took too long. The point stalled. The flanking infantry felt it and stepped forward to cover. Now the ring did what it had been built to do. It turned each forward step into a sideways angle. Light riders along the ring's edge never offered a clean flank. They offered oblique shots and sudden darts that forced men to pivot. Pivoting broke order. Breaking order opened seams. Seams drew arrows. What had been a single effort became three small struggles, each slightly off from the other, each late to the signal. Inside these struggles, the most disciplined formations did what they were made for. The Templars and Teutonic Knights drew themselves into squares, 4 faces of men and shields, lances bristling. A square is a promise, no back, no exposed side. It is also a clock. A square holds against a rush. It suffers against a storm. The storm here was not rain, but time measured in arrow flights and horse lungs. Arrows seek joints, the gap under the arm where 2 plates meet, the soft of a cheek under a visor, the inside of a thigh where mail does not sit flat. Horses on the outer faces never stopped shuffling. Horses inside blew hot and useless into each other's necks. Every minute in the square was a minute of sweat and breath burned away. Henry rode the center. Chroniclers do not agree where he fell. Some say an arrow slid under his armplate as he lifted it to signal. Some say he fell after being struck and his horse rolled. But they agree on what happened around him. His guard crowded in. The banner dipped and rose. And for a little while that strip of silk gave the army a second wind. Banners matter. They are not magic, but they are sight. If you can still see your Lord's color, your world has not ended yet. He used that bubble of time to try a different answer. Instead of feeding more men into the stuck point, he tried to punch the ring where it seemed thinnest, a little to the north. Drums beat, crossbows, slow to wind, deadly when a target presents, came up in patches where smoke thinned. A small battery, guns dragged by oxen or horses, was shoved forward to frighten the ring with sound and iron. For a brief span it worked. The ring swayed, the riders pulled back from the gun mouths, and one side of the square found space to step. The men inside shouted. The door was there. Then the wind turned. The same smoke that had masked Mongol movements in the morning now rolled over the European front. A horn cried from inside that gray wall, and from the far side of the shallow stream riders came where riders should not have been able to come. Their ponies broke the bank with little effort. The heavy chargers that tried to follow slid and balked. Officers waved for men to form on the gun line. The gun line could not see them. Orders tried to move by voice. Voice did not carry across the breathing smoke. By the time the air cleared, the thin place had moved 300 paces to the right, and the army had missed it. After that, the ring did not need tricks, it needed patience. Arrows always from just beyond the charge. Small rushes of lances not to break, but to shove. Every attempt to pull back turned into a squeeze. Every attempt to wheel turned into a tangle. Among the Moravians, a captain tried to lead his men by the sound of his own voice. When he turned to check his rear, the rear was gone. Among the Silesians, a banner fell and rose twice before it fell for good and did not come back. In the Teutonic remnant, the brothers locked shields and took one careful step back at a count of 3, then another, until a rider burst through the smoke and knocked the cadence a half-beat off, and the half-beat killed the step. By mid-afternoon, the battle was no longer a contest. It was an accounting. Mongol riders stopped wasting arrows on blocks that could not move. They aimed for men who still looked like leaders, for horses that still looked like they could carry orders. They cut off small groups and let them run, then cut them again when they mistook space for safety. They did not press too close to the squares. They did not test fortitude for the sake of glory. They treated courage like any other resource, something their enemy would spend until empty if given reasons to keep spending. The last stand formed around what Henry had left that could still be called a center. A corps of knights dismounted to hold ground, stabbing from behind shields, because horses had become a liability. Crossbowmen under their pavises, large shields used when reloading, worked in pairs, one winding, one shooting, trying to hold a little lane open. The Templars' banner tilted toward that lane, then away, then toward it again as messengers tried to find a path through noise. When the end came, it was quick. A knot of Mongol lancers, saved for this one use, pushed into that lane and broke it in two. The banner dipped one last time. The square broke into a cluster. The cluster became bodies. What remained tried to leave the field toward Legnica. Not a rout, there was no speed left for panic, but a tired, stubborn withdrawal. The ring did not chase with fury. It walked with them at the same careful distance, punishing every piece that lagged, turning every pause into a loss. Remember this style. You will see it again in Europe in different hands in different centuries. It is not a new weapon. It is a new patience. Afterward came the part that burns into memory. The Mongols counted the dead by cutting right ears. A crude but fast tally. Chroniclers write of sacks filled, numbers that never match between texts. They tell of Duke Henry's body found days later by his mother, recognized by an extra toe on his foot. They tell of banners taken and sent east as proof. They tell again and again of a feeling, that the enemy never gave them the fight they had trained for, that every time a man gathered himself for a charge worth singing about, the charge bit air. What did Europe learn? The first lesson was the wrong one, that the Mongols were demons who would not stand. That is comforting because it puts defeat outside skill and planning. The better lesson is harder and more useful. The enemy chose where and when to stand, and he chose it based on your habits. He set distances the way a hunter sets a snare. He made you believe that pursuit was always your choice when in truth he held the leash. Could Henry have changed it? Yes, but not by more courage. Courage he had. The change lay in rules before the third day's noon, a strict leash on pursuit under fog, reserves kept for breaking a flank, not for pouring into the center, an early choice of ground that forced the enemy to come closer than his bows liked. None of those promises victory. All of them changed the shape of the day. At Legnica, the shape was a ring, closing. The hunt ended not with a roar, but with a breath let out at last. The field grew quiet except for crows and for the low, regular sound of men walking among the fallen, doing the grim work that follows any battle, old or new. In the final block, we will pull back and count the real costs. Lost men, lost families, lost time, and the ideas Europe took from this defeat that did change later wars. We will also park our what-if at the exact hinge, the hour before the point went in, when the ring could still have been kept a wall. Interactive checkpoint. If you were in Henry's place at noon on the third day, which rule would you write on a scrap of parchment and hand to your captains? No pursuit beyond the hedges. Keep the reserve for the rib, never the corridor, or stand on chosen ground and make them come. Tell me your choice and why. The day after Legnica did not look like victory or defeat from far away. Fields were quiet again. Smoke thinned and crawled into the tree line. Up close, the picture was sharp and simple. Broken lances, torn pennons, hooves stamped into mud, and men who would never go home. The Mongols worked with the same cold order they had shown in battle. They gathered prisoners, sorted spoils, counted the dead by cutting right ears. Chroniclers disagree on numbers, medieval sources always do, but they agree on scale. A coalition hurt badly enough that parts of Silesia had no lords left to sign charters, and knightly families lost their heirs in a single morning. For the coalition, cost came in layers. First, the obvious. The best mounted men were gone or horseless. These were not just fighters, they were local leaders, men who held villages together in harvest and guarded bridges in winter. Second, the orders paid in blood. The Templars and Teutonic Knights had stood where they were asked to stand and held longer than anyone else. That is how their rules were written. It also meant they became the anvil under a hammer that did not tire. Third, the rumor that followed the army home, "The enemy will not stand," was a wound in its own right. You can recruit men after a defeat. It is harder to recruit confidence. For the Mongols, cost looked different. They lost few men relative to the result, and they did not waste horses. Their quartermasters kept pace with the fight. Remounts rotated, bowstrings kept dry, spare quivers where they were needed. Their leaders spent arrows the way good commanders spend time, never to look busy, always to gain an advantage. After Legnica, they did not drive straight for the heart of Europe. They turned their attention where their plan said it was needed. A death in the distant capital of their empire would soon pull princes back east to choose a new ruler. Legnica was not the end of a road. It was one step in a design that did not depend on song or shock. Why did the feigned retreat and the ring work so well? It was not because the Mongols were fearless monsters. Europe called them that because fear enjoys a mask. The answer is simpler and more uncomfortable. They set the distances. They decided when a chase began, how long it stayed hot, and where it ended. When you control distance, you control rhythm. When you control rhythm, you decide when the other side spends its breath and when it wastes its best shape. They also used ground as if they had built it. Legnica's bowls and hedged lanes did not belong to anyone, but the Mongols behaved as if they owned the map. Smoke devices, ceramic pots that breathed thick fog when lit, gave them windows of blindness to move through. Streams that looked small to a footman were big to a warhorse in iron. Orchard walls were not fortresses, but they were fences well placed for turning a line into a file. None of this is magic. It is rehearsal, memory, and a willingness to leave pride outside the fight. What did Henry's coalition do wrong? Less than the story tells. They did many things right. Twice Henry refused the urge to sprint, kept his line together, and used his reserve where it might hurt the enemy most. Against a flank. He tried to open the door for his trapped wedge instead of feeding good riders into a narrowing lane. He stood where a lord should stand and showed his banner when men needed to see it. The problem was not courage or honor. The problem was timing and rules. 3 rules could have changed the shape of the day. First, a leash on pursuit under fog and smoke. Not a timid order, a simple one. No mounted body rides out of support range without a fixed signal to recall, and the man who gives that signal is named before dawn. This would not stop all traps, but it would turn a long chase into a short test and keep the wedge a hand's breadth from its string instead of a bead off the thread. Second, reserves kept for the ribs, not the corridor. The instinct when a point is stuck is to shove behind it. That feels like help. Against a moving ring, it is food. The better use is ugly and thankless. Hit the thin places on the sides again and again, never mind that the ring slides. Do it with men who are fresh and disciplined enough to stop when the ring refuses. Restraint is a weapon here. Third, choose ground early that forces the enemy close. A shallow ridge with a ditch in front. A line with fewer hedged gaps and a stream on one flank. Anything that makes horse archers step nearer than they like to, or aim from a place where crossbows, slow to wind but deadly, can do work. Even better, dig a little. Stakes and shallow pits are cheap. You do not need to keep them all day. You need them for the first 2 hours while the enemy decides whether he wants to hunt or to fight. Make him fight. Would these rules have saved the day? They would have changed the geometry. A shorter chase leaves more air in men and horses. Pressure on the ribs forces the ring to spend better riders earlier, which means fewer fresh lances to lock the door when your point seeks a gap. Ground chosen at dawn drives the first exchanges closer, where your weapons work better and their arrows work worse. None of this guarantees a bright banner at sunset, but it moves the hour when choices collapse. Now the larger what if, the one audiences always ask. What if Europe had gathered its strength sooner in one place with one commander? The answer is that numbers help only if they can move. A single army with 2 minds is not stronger than 2 armies with 1 mind each. The Mongols excelled at making big armies act like a handful of tired men. The counter is not only mass, it is simple control, clear command, strict signals, and a habit of saying no to the most tempting moment of the day. The enemy wanted you to chase. The reply is not a slogan about caution. It is a plan about where you stop, who says stop, and what happens to the man who does not. What did Europe actually learn? In the first weeks, terror, sermons, walls improved with fresh stone, letters between kings heavy with fear. But in the years that followed, there were quiet changes. Armies practiced keeping intervals while moving through lanes. Crossbows and later early handguns were brought forward under shields to bite at archers who preferred to sit far away. Smoke was no longer treated as a sign from heaven. It was handled as a tool an enemy might bring to the field. Most of all, commanders paid better attention to time. Not glory time, the charge that will be remembered, but clock time. How long a horse can gallop in iron. How long a square can stand before breath becomes a problem. How long orders take to move by voice when flags are gone. Legnica also left a mark on memory that mattered. The idea that an enemy could win by refusing your idea of a battle. That is a bitter lesson for a continent that loved single combats and set pieces. But it is a useful one. You cannot force a man to stand where you wish if he can kill you while he runs. You can, however, force him to come near on your terms or leave with nothing. That is strategy, not a trick, a choice about where the fight happens and at what price. The last scene belongs, as it often does, to simple people. Farmers came to the field days later and found bread bags, bits of mail, pieces of reins. They buried men whose names they did not know because someone had to. They told stories about riders who appeared from smoke and vanished into it again. Some stories grew fangs and horns. Others carried a cleaner point. Beware of the enemy who makes you spend yourself before you touch him. If there is a single line to take from Legnica, it is this: patience wins the hour before courage decides the minute. The Mongols owned the hour. Henry and his men owned many brave minutes inside it. History remembers both, but it pays its rent to the hour. What if, your turn? You can write one order at dawn on day 3 and make every captain read it aloud to his unit. What will it say? No pursuit beyond the hedges. Reserves strike the ring's sides, never the gap. Or stand on the ridge and make them come. Drop your line in the comments and tell me why you chose it.